Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Today, we're going to discuss what are the lessons for corporate India from the GENSOL crisis, where you heard that the promoters had sort of allegedly siphoned some money to buy a house in Gurgaon. And what happened is in that process, they lost the confidence of the investors because they had raised funds from venture capitalists and a big company that would have become, they run brands like Blue Smart, which had earned a name for itself in the cab business. They sort of, in a sense, lost confidence of the investor. Uh, it's not good for the image of corporate India when people are sort of accused of siphoning out money. And that's why we sort of going to take up this issue today with an eminent panel who understand these issues, that what is the lesson that corporate India can learn from this crisis. Let me welcome uh, Mr. Rajiv Gowda. As you know, he has served as a director on the Reserve Bank of India, as a former member of parliament and a Congress leader also, but he's vastly, variedly known as a policy expert. He weighs in on that front today on this panel. He will sort of today speak on how what needs to be done and what corporate India needs to do. You're coming on the show for the first time. Good to see you. Appreciate your joining us. And of course, it's not the last time. Looking forward to host you more often on the show. We also welcome Mr. Rakesh Nangia. He's chairman of NANGIA Anderson India Private Limited. It's a firm that's into chartered accountancy and consultancy. Good to see you, Mr. Nangia, and looking forward to your insights on this topic. Vaibhav Thakkar joins us. He's a senior partner with Saraf and Partners, one of India's leading partners, and has done extensive work on the M&A side as well as listing of companies. Does a lot of extensive work on SEBI policy also. Good to see you, Vaibhav, and looking forward to some interesting insights.
Likewise, sir.
Aditya Ajgaonkar. He joins us from the city of Mumbai. Aditya is well known for his practice on the tax side. Also is a well-known commercial lawyer. He practices at the Bombay High Court, the tax tribunals, and also the Supreme Court. Good to see you, Aditya. At the outset,
Thanks for having me, sir.
let me welcome, in a sense, Mr. Gowda to make the opening comment, and then we move on for the others to get in on this topic. Over to you, Mr. Gowda.
Thank you, Tarun. See, these sorts of crises keep erupting periodically, and they pose a real challenge to the policy environment. If you think about the impact of this, right, the allegations are of fraud, of misuse of funds, not actually, allocating resources that were supposed to be allocated for electric vehicle purchase, diversion of funds, all these sorts of things. Now, this sort of thing is not the first time a problem of this sort has arisen, and but the impact is substantial. When you think about Blue Smart being shut down, lots of jobs have been, affected, and and the faith in the system is also eroded. And so, as a policymaker, as a regulator, right, you would want to make sure that we minimize these sorts of diversions of resources and frauds and things of that sort. And this presents a policy dilemma because, especially when you're talking about the startup domain, we want to create the sandbox environment where people are free to move fast and break things and, things of that sort. We want innovation to flourish. We want companies to be out there doing amazing stuff. But, somewhere in that enterprise, in that fast moving activity, there is, either willful ignorance of how you should actually go about doing things, or a lot of startups, for example, discover the regulatory environment in which they're operating much later. Once they've proven a certain concept, they're in a particular, they've got some momentum, and then they suddenly come across these constraints that they hadn't fully imagined or engaged with before. Now, this is one part of the story. The other is with the agencies that are supposed to regulate, right? Whether it's SEBI or whether it's the ED or whoever else, that whole institutional environment is, again, here I'm speaking more with a party hat on. Essentially, there is a sense that these are organizations that are somewhat compromised in the current environment. And if that's the case, right, then maybe many promoters, etc., figure that there are ways of dealing with anything that might emerge, right? But investors, VCs, they've spoken with, they've really conveyed their intent not to continue backing these companies. And this is a tragedy because Blue Smart was about to work out a deal with Uber and to enhance Uber's electric vehicles fleet, right? So all those sorts of opportunities disappear. But what it does is this is reminding us that these sorts of institutional flaws seem to exist. These sorts of violations keep happening, and if you look at the accumulated, the bank losses in these domains, there's a couple of lakh crores. The banking system over the last decade or more, just in terms of willful defaulters and everything that's going wrong. So where is the audit system? Where is the regulatory, enforcement system? How come all of this happens and we're not able to catch it well in advance? Is there no way of getting promoters on the right track way ahead of time? What does it take within the ecosystem to make those changes? That's the real concern that I would have.
Thank you for that opening comment. I'll go to Rakesh Nangia, chairman of Nangia Anderson, for his opening comment. We'll weigh in on this issue and give his analysis of what kind of impact do these things have and what is the way forward.
I think, Tarun, more important is what is the cause of it. Once we know the cause, we remedy the cause, everything falls back in place. If you see what are the causes for the failures of businesses, and then what exactly happened, the impact have been shared by Mr. Gordon right now. See, if you see as a corporate is concerned, if I put it 7-8 key points, one, first, especially company going listed, especially when you have a shareholder money, is a poor financial controls the company may had it, or had it actually, in this case had it. There was a complete failure in business practices. There was a lot of, though they were not, they were GENSOL and Blue Smart, there's not a subsidiary company, they were independent company on the record. They were related party transactions. And this is a related party transaction. As we find experience, the maximum challenges comes across the regulator or the business being failed is the related party transaction happening, and where it is easy for a promoter to take out money from one company to other company or from one business to another. This is one of the biggest challenge, in my opinion, which causes a business constraint of money and the failure of the business. Another important, use of capital for other activities. Putting a lot of personal expenditure funding across buying of personal assets, and diversion of money from one business to another business. That is again not a permissible activity. You have put in as a business, but the money has to be put in the business for which you borrowed the money or for which you are raising the money for. So these are the key, basically, causes of failure of the business and what needs to be done actually. What needs to be done? The biggest failure is not having a good corporate governance. And in the absence of that, you find, and then we need to go, why there's not a good corporate governance? And we have been talking about these things, both the theme subject, from actually going for a long time. We are stitching it, something pieces together, but has it come out to some solution? Answer, maybe not really. Because the person who's doing a crime, or person who's withdrawing the money, or person who's doing a related party transaction is finding a way out of the law to do these transactions. So the business must ensure transparency. That's a very important thing. And the day you have a non-transparent business, it means you have something to conceal. And here starts the first stepping thing. The business start getting affected. You need to protect the interests of shareholders and all stakeholders. That should be the key thought in your mind. As a business, I need to protect them, basically. I need to have ethical business practices and compliance with all laws. These are key, some corporate governance issues. Then you need to really plan for risk mitigation, risk management, right disclosures, and accountability of the company's operations. So here, and all the key stakeholders from the company point, corporate governance becomes important. And actually, you see in today's case, so many times it's happening, any delinquency case which comes, you first find that independent directors are resigning now. It has happened. If you see from last one, what it is happening.
Yeah,
in
you
the-
companies are not even finding independent directors in many cases. I think to find
you,
an
you,
independent director has become a challenge.
you know, the reason is the position as an independent director is so challenging, so difficult to uphold it, having knowledge, having experience, having understanding the balance sheet. So that is basically may not be readily available. I'm not saying they don't have it, maybe not be readily available with that knowledge today. And then you become a deficient in that extent. And there then misgovernance happen, and there the frauds happen, there the leakages happen, and then ultimately it has an effect on the failure of the business. If
Thank
you have
you.
having GENSOL, it's incorporated in 2007. It is there from last 18 years. And immediately, just in 1 year, it was not like it was a slow failure. It just happened everything in 1 year time. So I think it's a very good case study, which way we have time, we may have a little bit of, we'll go through that.
In
What
fact,
happened?
yes, in fact, the GENSOL can be a case study for corporate India. I'll take this to Vaibhav Kakkad for his opening comment. Vaibhav, in fact, in the recent past, we have had cases of shareholder activism where in many other established companies, shareholders have raised observations and made observations on related party transactions, which the promoters then have stopped after the shareholders raised those issues. Given that as a base, could you share your opening comment?
First of all, thank you, Tarun, for having me over the show, and a great question to begin with. Uh, Look, first of all, at the very outset, as a lawyer, I must call out that the GENSOL SEBI order is only an interim order, and it is basis preliminary findings. So one needs to see what transpires basis a detailed forensic audit and what all gets discovered through that forensic audit. There are a few facets to the GENSOL saga that we all must appreciate. This is one instance where at least one watchdog was doing their job, which was the credit rating agencies. If you might recall, how this issue got picked up was that as per certain practices that credit rating agencies have to follow with various corporate borrowers are supposed to, on a periodic basis, certify their repayment arrangement and the fact that they are repaying on time vis-a-vis their lending facilities to the credit rating agency. The credit rating agency realized that some of the certifications that they were procuring from the lenders and which were being provided to the credit rating agencies was seemed falsified. They were the first ones to raise the alarm. And that is how this issue got picked up. They made certain disclosures. GENSOL suddenly came in the middle of scrutiny. GENSOL had to come up with a public press release denying that those records are falsified. And rest is history as to what has subsequently transpired. If you see with what has happened in GENSOL, as Mr. Rajiv Gowda rightly pointed it out, this is not happening for the first time. There is a common theme running across these incidents. Whether you look at the case of CG Power and the Thapar Group, whether you go as far as back at Mr. Ramalinga Raju and Satyam, whether you look at what has transpired vis-a-vis United Spirits and Dr. Vijay Mallya, or whether you look at the case of Fortis Healthcare and Singh Brothers, where I'm personally involved in representing the independent listed company, there's a common theme. The common theme is promoters siphoning away public money for their personal gain. And that common theme is usually supported by another theme. And that theme is a bunch of yes men who act as the key management of the company. So, all the key managerial personnel, whether it's the CFO, whether it's the company secretary, whether it is the internal auditors, and then certain external agencies such as the statutory auditors, supported by a very congenial and friendly board of independent directors. This is a common theme you will see across the board with with listed companies where promoters have siphoned away money. And you will unfortunately observe that by the time SEBI concludes their investigation, one realizes that the fault not only lies with the promoters who tried making a personal gain, it also lies with all these key functionaries that under law are supposed to act as a check and balance who don't do their job. Typically, in all of these listed companies, there's a complete promoter override. Everybody acts as a yes man. And by the time the saga reaches a crescendo, it's too late. And that is one sort of key challenge that we are seeing happen again and again. Before I conclude my initial remark, I think there are three, four key themes that we need to focus upon, Tarun. What happens to the company after this? Because as you would have noted, promoters holding has subsequently come down to 35%. almost entire holding of the promoter is pledged with banks. I would imagine that under the financing documents, basis the SEBI order that has been issued a couple of days back, most lenders will call it an event of default, and the promoters are likely to lose control of the company. So, what happens to the company and the fate of equity shareholders? Mind you, this is a company which had a market capitalization of 3,000 crores. The share price is almost crashed, and the share price now today is 1/10 or 1/15 of what it was a few months back. So what happens to the fate of the equity shareholders in the company? And of course, the path from here and after for the erstwhile promoters, I would imagine, the investigation agencies clearly on the basis of the preliminary finding of the SEBI order, it appears this is a case of fraudulent unfair trade practice where they've siphoned money for their personal benefit. They've also used money to buy the shares of its own company and create a false market for it, which is a clear case of fraudulent unfair trade practice. And also, to add to this, these are all ingredients that seem to satisfy the principle of fraud under company law. So I would imagine the Serious Fraud Investigation Office and the Enforcement Directorate all stepping in to sort of look at this issue. So you will almost have 3, 4 regulatory agencies now trying to sort of evaluate this issue from their different lens. I just hope that everybody has in mind ultimately the concern of the company and its equity shareholders. The company should not end up becoming the victim of this fraud.
In fact, you highlighted very beautifully the company, like they saved Satyam, which became Tech Mahindra. It is good if the government steps in and saves the shareholders. Good point that you made. I'll go to Aditya Asgaonkar, who joins us from Mumbai, for his opening comment. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you for having me, Tarun. Luckily, I'm a part of a very erudite panel today, most of which has already covered the aspects of corporate governance that have seemingly failed, the internal controls that seem to have failed, and the broader policy framework. But speaking from my experience, with the background of looking at economic offenses, there is quite a bit of a trend. Now, again, as Mr. Kakkar was kind enough to point out, there is a good chance this is just an interim order. So we don't know where exactly the investigation leads from here. This is all very preliminary. And, obviously the law will take its own course. But the issue is siphoning off seems to have been a very, very common allegation in the last few years with respect to a lot of the transactions that corporate India seems to have gotten itself into hot waters with. If you see a lot of, in fact, ED actions that make the headlines right now also of companies that are otherwise not necessarily, indulging in malpractices themselves. They seem to be in trouble because the promoters have been, there have been allegations against the promoters of siphoning of funds that have been borrowed from public institutions for their personal benefits. And I think this has become systemic with respect to the broader industry at large, which is going to cloud, according to me, the Indian corporate scene. Because if individual investors and even foreign investors cannot find themselves comfortable with how the companies themselves are going, I mean, you cannot invest in a company, especially a startup. I'm not talking about the established giants that have years and years of track record behind them. But, how are we supposed to have a vibrant startup ecosystem if so many companies are accused, how so many promoters and their companies are accused of siphoning of funds? How does a foreign investor come in? What sort of comfort does he get investing in money? What happens to the retail investors that, basically want to invest in cutting edge tech, or, want to look at the next Flipkart coming out of India, next Zomato coming out of India, or me? And if this is something that happens to a tangible product, right? I mean, the government's been talking, we've had people speak about India needing to do cutting edge research and cutting edge solutions for the startup ecosystem. What really happens, Blue Smart was something that was tangible. People used it. I'm sure a lot of us used it regularly to use. We could see the assets right there in front of us. There was an app, we called for the service. The service actually came. We utilized the service and went off. But what about, I think these sort of allegations per se if they're true, of course, they need to be looked into, very, very strictly. But these sort of allegations are not good for the Indian ecosystem with respect to startups, especially. I'm not looking at industry, because we've had a lot of these come, being unearthed recently. And it's not just an India problem. The promoter problem is a worldwide thing. A startup usually banks on the charisma of the promoter to fundraise, to be able to go out and be the face of the company. We don't really need to take names, but we've seen company share prices fluctuate very widely based on what promoters are saying, on open forums also. So you cannot necessarily take away the shadow that a promoter casts on the company. But I think there is a case made out for better professional management with respect to, especially those sectors that are susceptible to such sort of allegations, those that have grown exponentially over the last couple of years. Say perhaps those would be something that perhaps may need to tread with some caution, because it's so easy to make allegations.
You may have a point there, because I see that if one sector does well, suddenly 10, 12 startups start in that sector, and VCs flood those startups with money. So any theme that is doing well, a lot of startups come. I'll go to Mr. Gowda, who's from Bangalore, and this is the startup capital of India. Do you think shakes the confidence of the investor when this happens, and there's much more scrutiny on newer startups after every allegation of siphoning out? And what do you feel about this? Because every time startup entrepreneurs acquire flashy lifestyles and assets, they suddenly come into much more scrutiny. And you know this better than many, that this has been happening in India, that startups are in losses year after year, and the lifestyles of the persons who are helming them grows every year, but the losses also keep on growing. So there is a mismatch between the entity which makes losses and the lifestyle of the promoter or the group of founders who sort of lead that startup. Over to you for your comment.
Well, see, this is the reason why this is such a conflicting issue, because we do want to create an environment where entrepreneurship thrives, where risk-taking thrives, where VC firms are able to go out and back companies with with their deep pockets, in the hope that over time, I mean, many of the big unicorns that we're talking about, many of them have not actually made profits yet, right? And of course, some of their bosses, but personal flashy lifestyle, they may be earning enough from whatever salaries they're taking or whatever shares that they're monetizing. But every once in a while, for example, one big payments company, you saw that there was something similar, right? And that person was ousted from the company itself, and so when you see those kinds of situations, then you start wondering, why do our founders behave in this manner? And as a policymaker, the response is, how do you create guardrails that prevent them from behaving in this manner? And one of those is this whole idea of the board and independent directors. Now, I've been, apart from being a director of the RBI during the UPA years, when I was a professor at IIM Bangalore, what shall we say? I've also been an independent director of another big company, and I've found that there's always a lack of information on the part of independent directors to be able to guide the company and its leadership in back on track in some ways. And so there, I think maybe and we were alluding in this conversation to why not many people want to be independent directors anymore. They're saddled with the liability, but they actually did not know enough about what was going on to actually go a step forward and exercise their fiduciary responsibility. So maybe there's one solution is in the direction of really training independent directors in what you might call forensics or something, to ask the questions that will keep track of these sorts of situations. But that would make it even harder to find more people, I suppose. And then, of course, there is the issue of the agencies themselves. And here we're talking about when we say regulatory sandbox, more freedoms, an opportunity to experiment and do things, but do all those within the law. Don't the kinds of frauds that we've seen here? The allegations are of related party transactions, siphoning off of money. These are patterns that we've seen across the board. This is some flaw in a section of Indian entrepreneurs. Okay, the thought that they can get away with these shortcuts. Okay, and that might be because there's a certain impunity drawn from their other clout that they may have, or their stardom or something of that sort.
But
It's a very tricky space.
You made a very good point. Independent directors are not given enough information to decide. So information being withheld from them. This is an important point. I would like to add that some independent directors sort of also complain that minutes of the meeting are prepared without the meeting actually happening. And it may not be that uncommon for board meetings not happening, but the minutes being sent for signing. So we also see such things happening. I'll go to
one sec. Let me just add one last point here. I'm not, it's been more than 11 years since I left IIM, but whether it's at IIM or whether it's at Wharton, I'm not sure how many case studies there are of corporate governance failures and things like that, because we're mostly...
You mean in India or at Wharton University?
Wherever. In the business school curriculum, there's a tendency to celebrate success rather than identify failures and what led to them. Okay, especially this sort of crooked behavior. Yeah.
Point very well taken. I go to Rakesh Nangia, Chairman Nangia Anderson, for his comment.
I think a very important part to be seen, and taking everybody's opinion. One bad case, I say one bad fish spoils the pond. I don't agree. There's so many good cases. There's so many successful cases. There were so many cases that you go in the country of this size, number of startup, number of businesses, delinquency, good businesses. I don't think that this needs to be generalized, and we need to follow the best of practice. We need to have the best of the system. We need to have a corporate governance. We need to have good independent actors, rightly mentioned. I know about the independent actors. We normally call them samosa khane aa gaye. Sorry, I'm using the word because there's no value addition. There are so many cases like that. And that could be because of lack of experience. Because you need independent actor for what he was there in the past, not what is his competence or contribution he's going to give to the company today when he joins as an independent actor. So first of all, I don't think so. I'm here to pass a verdict on this case. Things over time, we do not know. As you go down, rightly mentioned by Weber, is an interim case. You do not know what happened. We do not know what happened, to what extent it happens, whether there's somebody buys a company, if something happens or doesn't happen. But most important is that this does not generalize everything. There are hundreds of good cases. There's a whole ecosystem of startup has changed in the country. The whole funding is available. We get a maximum of the FDI, maximum of new startup coming up, maximum of unicorns coming up. So I don't get, yes, it has to be a balanced approach. It has to be a sensible approach. It is not a radical way, everything has gone haywire. Yes, it's a bad case. It's a learning experience. We need to learn it. We need to bring more governance in it. We need to have a financial control for it. We need to ring fence all these things. It makes a lot of sense. So we need to distinguish this. This is and I want everybody to deep dive. Just think the success. One stake is, don't need to get right, but we need to work on it. So the repetition doesn't happen. That is more important, actually. And as we deep dive, we will know more what are the skeletons, actually. Right now, it is a lot of limited information available. It all happened in less than a month, actually. And things are changing. All inspection have done, partial report has come. So I think it's wait, hold, and see exactly what happens. Let's not jump and criticize the whole ecosystem.
You made a fair point because you found one fall company. Let's not tarnish that the whole pond is black. Fair point. I'll go to Vaibhav Kakkad for his comment on independent directors, the difficulty in finding them. Then if they are good, then they're not being given information, as Mr. Gowda also raised that. Over to you for your comment.
Thanks, Tarun. I will definitely respond on the issue of independent directors in a moment, but I have a few observations on this entire matter. As you had rightly pointed out, Tarun, we have an example where one of India's largest software company, when it was discovered that there was a fraud undertaken, the government stepped in to protect the interest of lakhs of employees and lakhs of equity shareholders, where the government set up a specific board. They overrid the board, the existing board. They conducted an auction, and Tech Mahindra won over Satyam. And that is how the company was rescued. What will happen ordinarily, Tarun, in a case like this, assuming SEBI's interim order and all the facts that have been set out there are true and accurate? SFIO will show up in no time. So will perhaps the Enforcement Directorate. And then you will see multiple investigation agencies looking at these issues. Who will suffer at the end of it all? The equity shareholders whose wealth has completely gotten eroded over the last 1 year, those who invested at the highs and now are seeing the company crashing. First of all, what's absolutely critical is that one is the focus on punitive and regulatory action that regulators might take. The other is to reform and revive the company. The law books have sufficient number of provisions which empower the central government to take over the board, which empowers SEBI to take over the board, appoint specific agencies, consultants, top-notch experts to run an auction process and sell this company to a bunch of institutional investors and revive the company. See, ordinarily what would happen, Tarun, is, as now is quite apparent from the interim order, that they seem to be defaulting on their loans. So one would imagine that the banks will now force this company into IBC. Now, what you don't want is, by the time the entire IBC process is over, that you have another example of Jet Airways. No revival. See, unless companies have very rich public infrastructure and resources, such as mines or steel assets, normally a company in the service sector, if it goes down the path of IBC, you look at the statistics, the revival chances are very little from the IBC path, because your interface with the customer goes away. Imagine if customers stop using Blue Smart cabs, what happens to the continuity, business continuity, and what happens subsequently to the business prospects. So what therefore needs to happen is that one is action against the erstwhile promoters, identifying what did the independent directors do, what did the auditor do in this case, what did the CFO do, were they acting as mere yes men, or were they ignorant of what was transpiring because things were kept hidden from them? That's one part of the investigation. But the second part is reviving the company. I think that is critical. Number one. Number two, I think what's also important is that typically these erstwhile promoters or these existing promoters or these so-called delinquent promoters will face a bunch of criminal action from SEBI, the SFIO, the ED in times to come. But if you actually look at the track record, once this media headline becomes stale, these trials will take forever for them to get concluded. Is that enough of a deterrence? In my view, what needs to happen in India, the law books very clearly, Tarun, have a provision called Section 245 of the Companies Act, which is the Indian law equivalent of US class action. As you are aware, Tarun, I'm in the middle of first securities class action lawsuit in India, where I filed on behalf of an investor against a listed company called Jindal Polyfilm in the National Company Law Tribunal. I think promoters and directors need to be made personally liable. Their personal assets need to be attached and sold to discharge and compensate for the loss that the listed company and its shareholders have. And I would totally agree with what Mr. Nangia said. Let us not throw the baby out of the bathwater. If you actually look at the last few years, the SEBI regime on related party transactions, what a listed company is required to disclose, what a listed company is supposed to do, has significantly tightened. So the answer would not be to tighten the regime even further. Let us not throw the baby out of the bathwater. The regime is tight, the regime is strong. What needs to happen is stronger actors. What needs to happen is more frequent checks. You don't need to increase the red light crossing fine, but what you need to do is more traffic policemen catching more people who are trying to cross the red light. So better enforcement is the answer. I think the promoters need to personally be made liable and directors need to be made personally liable to pay for the loss that has happened. It is only then there will be effective deterrence such that corporate India will avoid more frauds of this kind. Human greed need not be philosophized beyond a point. But if there are enough systemic checks and balances, and whenever there's a bad example, you are able to deal with it, you're able to revive the company, you're able to make the promoters personally liable for the losses that they've caused, and then you will see that investor interest will continue to be unabated. I think I strongly believe in corporate India growth story. The top 100, top 200 companies, I think those times are gone. Though you have to see the way those board meetings are conducted, how the independent directors behave. I think we are really marching forward. But what happens is each time something bad like this happens, it definitely dents the confidence. And therefore, you effectively deal with it and keep moving on, not make the regime tighter. In India, we have a problem where regulators look at bad instances and then completely change the regime to prevent that bad instance, forgetting that you're actually making ease of doing business your last objective by doing that. So that's something I would really want to call out for. Tarun, you're on mute.
Thank you for that comment. And uh, you also point out that 10 agencies land up at the promoter's door, then the company and the shareholders are completely ignored at that point. I'll go to Aditya Ajgaonkar for his comment.
What Weber said was quite correct. We probably don't need new laws and we need better policemen, more equipped policemen. But there is something that is very important for us to accept now, right? We are no longer living in the era that we were living in 5, 10, 15, 20 years back when all the big so-called scam or scandals that now get dwarfed have actually come out. We are no longer making accounting entries in ledgers on paper. We are no longer filing them once a year. We are no longer, randomly backdating documents, etc., etc., etc. Those things are not possible in today's digital era. Everything that you're doing is leaving an imprint. Everything that you are doing, every accounting entry that you pass or do not pass actually leaves an imprint. In fact, I know it for a fact that the income tax department is using AI for a lot of their assessments, and the use of these tools is just going to increase. They may be in the infancy, they may be nascent, but as far as government, as far as the regulatory structure is concerned, I don't think that it would be easy to discount the cutting edge advantage that technology has been bringing to regulators, where large amounts of data can be sifted through in extremely short time. Let us also not forget a very, very important aspect is that interagency sharing of financial information, data, is the reality today, right, across agencies. And we are not only talking about enforcement agencies, regulatory agencies, or police agencies. We are talking about across agencies. If you actually go to see, there is this financial intelligence unit, India, which is, the nodal intelligence gathering appointing, authority for PMLA. They have a huge list, a huge schedule list themselves of agencies with whom they regularly share information, right? So income tax sending information to GST, GST sending information to SEBI, SEBI sending information to RBI, so on and so forth. I do not think it is easy for any company, listed or otherwise, to escape scrutiny anymore. I do not think it is as simple as, making some paper companies, routing some transactions, etc. I think not only are the regulators much more well equipped than what they were, I think they're also very, very highly motivated, because a lot of the legacy issues due to understaffing and all goes out with the advent of technology. And forensic audits have also become a very, very important tool. I think we have to appreciate the role of independent chartered accountants that now are appointed not only by companies, but for forensic audits by Government of India or by third-party agencies to ensure that the books of accounts are actually, true and representative, and not just relying on the statutory audit report that may have been given. I think, with technology, we are at a cusp of a massive change, and we will see a lot less of this happen. Until that happens, we have to accept that anything like this happens, it will be detected and it will cause a lot of comment, and comment should happen. As Vaibhav keeps focusing on the investors, there are a lot of people who invest small money in the markets. They may not do it at a retail level. They do it through mutual funds, etc. When something like this happens, whether it is true or not is secondary. We cannot deny the fact that shareholder value of investments has eroded. People have lost money. Innocent people have lost money.
Thanks for that comment. Mr. Nangi, you wanted to comment on something?
No, I just was raising cash like that.
Okay. So in fact, this was a good discussion, but what discussion came out of today is the role of independent directors in corporate India. I think on another show, it will be nice if we could focus on the role of independent directors. Of course, now there are institutions in India that groom independent directors, that sort of shortlist these people for appointment. Mr. Kakkar, you wanted to comment on something?
Tarun, let me actually just address the point of independent directors. I think Professor Gowda was bang on. I think everybody is now scared of becoming an independent director. But let me break certain myths. Law is very clear. There's sufficient judicial precedence. As long as the independent director was not aware of the culpability of all the fraudulent transaction, but he took all necessary steps to raise the red flag, I think that suffices the standard that is required of an independent director. Of course, the independent director will rely upon management certifications and so on and so forth to identify where there's been an issue, where there's not been an issue. So if independent director has not been given the right set of information, he cannot be made personally liable. The law is very clear on that. What he's expected to do, what he or she is expected to do is to ask the right questions, to raise the red flags. If the cash flows of the company are going down, but the company is still making orders, if the company is doing more transactions with a related party, all of those questions need to be asked. The other issue, therefore, the independent directors are required to be continually trained. Professor Gowda rightly said, give them understanding of forensics, accounts, related party transactions, do upgradation, do training for them. We as lawyers, Tarun, sometimes go to the boards of big corporates where we give training separately to the independent directors, what their role is, what they're supposed to be asking. As long as that is done, remember here, how the fiasco got caught was because one watchdog was doing their job. That was the credit rating agencies. Similarly, if the independent directors do their job, I think all of these issues will get addressed. And the last quick point, Tarun, imagine you're an employee of a company where there's a promoter who's the managing director. He owns 70% of that company, and he tells you, transfer this money to so-and-so account for this particular transaction. Generally, no employee would generally have the wherewithal or competence or confidence to question and saying, why is the money being moved? Because there is this perception that the promoter, that old Lala, owns the business. Well, that's not correct. He only owns shares in a listed company where public shareholders are sitting. And so the moment you allow a protective whistleblower mechanism, there is a whistleblower law that was tabled in the parliament. Unfortunately, it's not seen light at the end of the day. If employees get that confidence that if they're seeing something wrong happen, and that can be reported under the whistleblower mechanism, and they will be protected, and rather they will be financially incentivized. Mind you, Tarun, a number of securities law scams that were discovered in the US happened because employees came forward under the whistleblower mechanism. A lot of them became rich enough to live lives in islands thereafter. But that kind of whistleblower mechanism is perhaps the way to ensure that employees, unfortunately, who get caught in these quagmires are able to do their job better and more effectively, such that these frauds get picked up earlier in time.
Thanks for that last intervention. Very informative. I would like to thank Professor Rajiv Gowda, Rakesh Nangia, Chairman Nangia Anderson, Vaibhav Kakkad, Senior Partner from Saraf and Partners, Advocate Aditya Ajgaonkar. Happy that you all could join on this important issue on this time when this issue is being debated across corporate India. Maybe next time we take up the role of independent directors as a topic, along with all the other details that are currently happening in corporate India. Appreciate your joining us on this one. Thank you so very much. Thank you
so much, sir.
Thanks.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.